I don't know why we can't have mail-in ballots. I know the president says that there's fraud, but he mailed in a ballot in Florida. Like, it seems to be, to me, less hackable than some of these, machines that we saw in 2016 that were hacked, or even during this current primary in Iowa, there were problems with the machines. What states are getting it right or ready for a mail-in ballot, barrage of mail-ins?
Well, there's 5 states that do voting almost entirely by mail, all in the West. So Oregon, Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Hawaii. And they've been running elections like this for a while. And they have high voter participation. They have low voter fraud. And voters love the system because who wouldn't like to have a ballot mailed to them? It's by far the easiest, simplest way to vote. And in some states, like Colorado, it's a fusion method, which is you can vote by mail if you want to, but if you want to vote in person, they also make it really easy to vote in person. So they have election day registration, for example. So if you want to show up at the polls and register to vote and vote on the same day, you can do that as well. That's kind of the best system because there are going to be some people that don't want to vote by mail for one reason or another because they're afraid they won't get their mail ballot or they're afraid it won't be counted, so they want to vote in person. But Trump is not opposed to mail voting. He's just opposed to mail voting when Democrats use it. And that's very clear what happened in Wisconsin. When in Wisconsin, Republicans were trying to game the system and make it so that their voters in conservative suburbs outside Milwaukee, in rural areas that didn't have the COVID pandemic as bad, that they could vote. But then they wanted to make it very difficult, particularly for black voters in Milwaukee, where you had only about 16% of the state's population, but half the COVID cases in the state. And so they thought that forcing people to vote in this situation would keep voter turnout down. And it did keep in-person voting down, but there was a record number of absentee ballots, and people figured out how to work the system. But it's not something that you can really do in a day or two with mail voting. It's not just like showing up in the polls. You have to be really prepared to do this. You have to request, in states that make you request a ballot, which is almost every state, you have to request your ballot well in advance. So I would urge voters, no matter what state they're in, look at the laws in their state and start requesting a ballot now, because it's not going to be the kind of thing you can wait to the last minute to do.
How much time do we have? All right, because I live in Jersey. I want to request a ballot like right now because I don't want to go out there. And so you're telling me every citizen can request a ballot?
Yeah, so some states make it easier than others. In some states, you need to have a reason to request an absentee ballot. Now,
coronavirus. Is that a good enough reason, Ari Berman? We're in a pandemic. Is that a good enough reason?
It should be a good enough reason. It's not clear that it's going to be a good enough reason in every state. I just saw that the Texas Attorney General said that it's not, you can't list coronavirus as a reason to get an absentee ballot, which is just the most mind-blowing thing I've ever heard. So there are some states that are going to make it as difficult as possible to vote by mail, particularly Republican-controlled states where they think that Democrats are going to be more likely to vote by mail. I think that is a mistaken political calculation. I think a lot of elderly Republicans are going to want to vote by mail too, and it can be disenfranchised if it's not made easy. But in most states, you don't have to have a reason for why you need an absentee ballot. And if you do need a reason, coronavirus should be a sufficient reason, or some sort of illness. You could put illness or fear of going out, whatever. But I would hope that election officials are going to interpret these provisions liberally, because obviously a lot of people are going to be afraid to vote. And we just have no idea if things are going to get better in November. From all we're hearing, large gatherings are still probably going to be prohibited in the fall.
I think this is a great solution, though. I just went on my New Jersey state website, and it says to receive your ballot by mail, the application must be received by the county clerk 7 days prior to the election. So they gave you, there's a very easy online per county by county application process that you fill out. Shouldn't take very long. Thank you, New Jersey, for making it easy. So all of us should be doing that today, going on our individual states' websites, and I just Google searched vote by mail request form and got sent right to my website.
Karen, one of the things that we did that happened here in New York, and Ari, thank you so much for all of your scholarship in this area because it has been phenomenal. But one of the things that happened here in New York was that there was a lot of pressure to ensure that coronavirus or fear of pandemic infection was explicitly stated as one of the reasons that people would be able to request a no-fault absentee ballot. And so I think what can happen is some of the pressure, when we talked before about the fact that democracy requires participation, people, if you live in a state that makes it very difficult for you to request an absentee ballot, this is where you're literally sitting at home. You can literally pick up the phone, call your elected officials, get your friends and family to call your elected officials to ensure that there is going to be some legislative movement that would allow you to include, unlike Texas, the coronavirus or fear of pandemic or fear of infection as one of the reasons, if you require one in that state, for you to get one. But Karen, what you said is very important. There is a time limit by when you have to request your absentee ballot. And what we saw in Wisconsin and in a number of states is that if you don't have it postmarked, your return answer postmarked by a particular date, it can sometimes be discounted. So this is one of those things that's going to require us to really exercise the muscles of electoral politics and engagement in which that we are nimble. And we are nimble at a whole lot of things. Exercising our vote necessarily has not always been one of them. So this is why having this conversation now in the spring is going to be important, because November is coming. And if you've already had a primary election, then that may not apply to you. But for those of us who live in states like New York, where our primary has just been moved from April to June, it's important that we're aware of this, because being aware of how these rules work is vitally important. Because if there is a postmark deadline and you miss it, your vote can be discounted.
Yeah, and Karen, I would just add that, for example, I'm very frustrated with how the process is playing out in New York, because I think the gold standard should be that you mail a ballot to every voter. That's what I want people to demand from their secretaries of state. That's what I want people to demand for their governor, from their elected officials. If they're not going to do that, I at least want them to mail an absentee ballot application to everyone, which is honestly what Republican secretaries of state in Georgia and Iowa and Ohio are doing right now. What I have to do in New York right now to get an absentee ballot, I have to go online. I have to print out an absentee ballot request form. I have to actually have a printer, which how many people have, particularly in the middle of a pandemic. I have to send it in. They have to send me the form. Then I have to send it back. Now, I can maneuver that system, but that's very inconvenient for a lot of people. New York said they were going to allow you to email your absentee ballot request form in, but apparently when people were trying to fill out the forms, it was still saying you had to print it. Why can't I just go online, fill out a form like a Google Doc, and get my absentee ballot sent to me? And this is absurd how complicated this process is. And people that are just kind of frustrated with the system writ large right now, and I imagine people are getting more and more frustrated by the day, given the conditions that we're dealing with, they're just going to say, I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to vote. And that's my fear, is that states are just going to make it so inconvenient that people aren't going to want to participate. And that's why we have to start advocating for these changes now, because it's not going to be possible to make them in October.
And actually, I just clicked into my Jersey one, and I have to do the exact same thing. I have to mail it in and put a stamp on it.
It's exactly, which is a form of a poll tax, by the way. And also, we're seeing what's happening with the post office, and we're seeing the difficulty of people would normally go out and buy stamps, right? A lot of people aren't going to do that right now. So the gold standard should be every state should mail every registered voter a ballot with a prepaid return envelope. That's what they do in Oregon. That's what they do in Washington. That's what they do in states that vote by mail. It might not be possible in every state. There might not be political will for it to happen in every state, but that's a demand we should be making of our elected officials.